So today what we'll do is we're looking at, start off with some entry data just so we can see how many entries there were. We'll talk about what went well, the success stories in terms of topics and questions that were good. We'll also look at topics that teachers may want to focus on this year based on how the performance was in the last month's exams. We'll talk about more generally about where students are losing marks, because this will cover not just the last exam series, but also probably in the past as well. We'll also talk about grade boundaries, performance, and then we'll talk about where you can find extra support to support your students and yourselves in delivering the content. So first of all, here is the entry data. So you can see that Pearson, we had nearly 12,000 entries, which was nearly 69% of the total. In total, there was 17,000 entries. So as usual, Pearson is a very popular choice for maths entries. So just as a bit of an aside, as usual, there's always a few social media posts after A-level and for maths exams. And we've got a few here just to lighten the mood a little bit. But as we can see, for the A-level for maths Corporal 1 paper, you can see they like that paper. That generally went quite well. The little student room poll there, most people would think that the paper one was quite good. Some people, said it was quite easy. Maybe it's because they've been taught well and they've revised hard. As we can see for paper 2, it wasn't quite the same. It still went quite well, but it wasn't as popular as the first paper. I will also be talking a little bit about the AS corporal paper as well, just again talk about some of the successes and things to focus on, because again some schools will just have an AS entry class. Some schools might have students that drop down from the 4A level to the AS, so I'll talk about some of those questions as well. So first of all, just a reminder, you can access the Maths Emporium to be able to access lots of resources, past papers, and other things we'll talk about some later on. If you haven't got your own Maths Emporium login, ask your exams officer to set you up with an Edexcel online account, and once you've got the online account, you can then log into the Emporium. Someone in the chat has asked about the number of entries for each module option be available at any point. I think Isabel might be able to help with that at some point, either in this session or later on. So again, for logging onto the Emporium, you've got to make sure you've got a valid centre email address. You cannot use your own personal email address. It must be a centre address. And like I said before, you must have an Edexcel online account. Also, as part of this session, you may want to have the exam papers and the mark schemes loaded up. We'll also make sure we put those into the chat. So if you get those loaded up now, so you've got access to them, I haven't put screenshots of all the mark schemes for every single question and the question I'm talking about on this presentation, because sometimes there's several pages of mark schemes with different alternative methods. So have those. If you want to look at the mark schemes that go along with some of the responses, then please have that open, ready to go. So there's links there that you can access, or just go to the Emporium if you want to. Okay, so first thing we'll do is we'll just chat about what questions, topics went well for the Core Pure 1, the Core Pure 2, and also the AS Core Pure exam. So based on the data, which is available obviously from Results Plus, that you can find yourselves, and also the data is in the Emporium, this is how it seemed that people thought was good topics, good questions. Okay, so we've got on the Core Pure 1 paper, roots of cubic equations was a definite, yeah, that was all good. Complex numbers with geometric identities and DeMorph, that was all good as well. Modeling with first order differential equations, that went well. Okay, Corpuscle 2, we've got hyperbolic functions, series and matrices, that was all good. And on the AS Corpuscle, again, we've got roots of cubics, standard results of series, and the last question, modeling volumes of evolution, also was very good. That was the last question on the paper, and that was a particularly good question. Let's look at the data that goes with those. So here are the data for those questions, and I've done it by part. So we can see that if we look at the average, like the mean percent at the bottom in the grey, we can see that the success on these particular questions, the mean, you've got 95%, 89%, etc. But we can also see how, say, like the C grade students did. And if you compare that to the maximum scores, they did all right. Okay, so I like to think about how do your C grade students, how are they doing? If they're getting a decent amount of marks, that's good. All right, so be looking at not just the A and the A star grade. Look at the C graders, look at the D graders. Are they picking up those marks? So if they're able to get it, then it means we're doing well. Again, we've got paper 2 there as well. You can see the means quite high for those questions. And we can see the C graders, again, a mean of 1.42 out of 2, 3.3 out of 5, 5.24 out of 6. They're doing all right. And again, you can access this data from the Emporium. A quick look at the AS as well. Obviously, no A stars. Again, you can look at those results there. 3 part C wasn't so great, but generally, overall, it was a good question. And again, those C graders are doing all right. So let's look at some questions, and we'll also look at some examiner comments with them. So here is question 2 from Corpuscle 1. So standard roots of the equation, we've got a cubic there, and we've seen lots of questions like this in the past. Fairly standard ones to do. We've got to write down the values of alpha plus beta plus gamma, and those are ones worth for 1 mark. So only 1 mark for all 3 of those, obviously, and then we've got to use those and other things for answering part B. And we can see here that candidates were clearly well prepared for this type, most achieving 4 marks. Okay, so that one went well. Let's look at a response. So here's the question. Is the student response there? They've got the correct values for part A. And part B, they've got the method mark and the correct answers. Part B, part 2, we've got, again, the correct answers there. Part 3, they've got the method mark. They have not got the accuracy mark. They've got any correct answer there, but they've done pretty well. They've still picked up that method mark. The slip was affecting the accuracy, but not the method. So the method was completely fine, but a small little slip to lose that accuracy mark at the end. So 7 out of 8. Let's look at question 4 now. So the complex numbers, again, fairly standard stuff here to look at. And again, the comment from the examiner, almost all candidates were able to make a meaningful attempt at passing all this question. Okay. Notation sometimes questionable, but methodology was generally sound. Let's look at a response for that. So here's their response here. Again, nice, neat. We can read that. We might see some responses later on that are a bit difficult to read. Try to make sure this is set out really nicely. It's quite easy to read, easy to mark. Really make sure your students are presenting their work in a good way. They've got those first 2 marks for part A. Part B, all good. Part C didn't go so well. Okay, they didn't reduce the correct equation. No valid attempt, so they've lost the marks on part C, but otherwise they've done pretty well. So they lost the 3 marks of part C, but otherwise they did okay. Let's now look at Core Pure 2. This is question 4. Again, using method differences to show this particular sum of series, and we've got to find A and B. 6 marks. Very well answered question. Again, any sort of arithmetic slips would have cost some final marks, but there were lots of method marks that are easy to get. Again, don't forget, if you haven't got these question papers and answers downloaded yet, you can click on the links to access them. So here's a response for that particular question. Again, nicely set out. Really showing the differences being used there. So they've got the first mark, correct partial fractions. Again, they've got that method mark, and they've got the correct non-cancelling terms. They combine them over common denominator, but they have got an incorrect answer. So a slight error in their collecting up terms there, 5 out of 6. Here is question 8 from the Core Pure 2 paper as well. So again, we've got a 3x3 matrix. In terms of K, we've got to find the inverse, and then we need to be using, again, that to solve our system of equations here. So again, they managed to invert the matrix accurately. Not many slips. Okay, again, simple arithmetic errors when calculating our determinant of matrix minors. For part B, quite important to see that many solved it by multiplying the vector by the inverse. There was a few that instead tried to do elimination method, and that probably is where like people lost marks. So if they used the inverse matrix, they were more successful. Those that were successful in doing the elimination method would have had their answers in the correct form. What did happen with this question is that if they presented their answer in a column vector, they would have lost the mark. So it's important that the answers to this part B were given either as a coordinate, a normal coordinate, or you could say x equals y equals z equals. They didn't accept the column vector of the answer. So here's a response. Again, part A, all good. Part B, all fine. And you can see also they've written their answer as a nice coordinate. That's all good. So they got 7 out of 7. So as I said, we'll look also at some AS questions, because again, you might have students that do the AS if they've dropped down from the further, or you might have an AS only group. Here is the Core Pure question 8 from the AS exam, and this one was the final question, and they did really well on it. So we've got to find a volume. And again, any errors were generally due to expansions rather than the actual integration. So they did quite well here. So look at a response for that as well. So the work is set out pretty well. Not as easy to read though. Handwriting is important. Part A was all good. Fairly straightforward for part A. Part B, they have lost some marks, accuracy marks, but they have got a lot of their method marks. You see that one there, that the A1 FT follow-through mark was given there. So they had correct follow-through integration with 3 terms. So they still can get some accuracy marks if there's follow-through marks available. Part C was incorrect. Now, answers for that particular thing, limitation answers, I think that we see quite often, sometimes they try to fudge their solutions to that. things for this particular question, things like the equation of the curve may not be a suitable model. The size of the ornament will be not perfectly smooth. There may be flaws. The corner ABC may not be perfect right angle. Things like that would be okay. Part D, we've got the comparison made that they've got that mark. Okay, a correct comparison is made. More glass need of an and an overestimate. So that one was 8 out of 11. Okay, let's now focus on the topics that didn't go so well. So what can be improved for the future? So again, looking at all three papers here, the AS1 included. So for Corpuscle 1, we've got polar coordinates, proof by induction, that was a series question, and second-order differential equations. Corpuscle 2, differentiating hyperbolic functions using the Maclaurin series, complex numbers, nth groups, and modeling the volumes of revolution, parametrically defined curves. And for the AS paper, rotation reflections of a 3x3 matrix, regions in the Argand diagram, and vectors. Specifically, lines, angles, and shortest distance. The shortest distance was the main problem with that particular question. So if we look at the data again, so for the A level, we can look at that general mean. We can see that for question 8, that vectors question, also it wasn't a vectors question, the corpuscle question, we can see for that particular question, the first two parts were okay. It was the last two parts. We can see on paper 2, fairly low on those. We can see that 9A was okay, but again, some low marks. If we look at the AS question here, we can see that that vectors question wasn't great. That last part, that D, 6D, the means 35% was quite low. The other ones weren't too bad. So again, you can get this data yourselves to see a good look and see where they went well, where they went bad, what was good, what was bad. Okay, so let's look at some responses and some questions. We haven't got responses for all these questions, so sometimes it'll just be some examiner comments, sometimes it'll be a response. So core pure 1 question 3, we will have a response for this one. Now, what we've also got here is we've got the mark trait data. So we can see exactly the sort of proportions of each mark being given to different grade students. So you can see in this bottom corner here, again, you can get this from Results Plus, I believe. So it might not look exactly the same as this, but you can get this mark trait data, and it is quite useful to look at. So if you look very, very carefully at again, look at the C graders, we can see that C graders are that accuracy mark for 3B wasn't so good. And the second accuracy mark, again, not great. Okay, so look to see where each mark is being collected. Really does, open up more questions. So, are they getting these method marks? Are they getting that method mark? What ones are we dropping? So it's a really good thing to look at. We see for this particular question, this polar points one, generally the polar work was well done. Okay, as in the context start caused a few difficulties, with many unable to write down the correct value for A. Okay, part A proved surprisingly challenging for candidates. It was not anticipated to be a difficult part. So part A was an issue. If we look at part B, the M3 and M4, these ones, the third and fourth method marks, that was better. than on the A1. That means that they were able to continue the question and get some marks, even if they don't necessarily get the accuracy mark beforehand. You know, there's still method marks to be had. There's these restart points that we may have talked about in previous CPD sessions. The students can still restart, pick up more marks later on in a question if they carry on doing things using correct methods. It's important they do carry on with questions if they're getting stuck or may think they might have made a mistake. Keep going, there's still marks to be gained. So here's a response. Not the neatest, but it's legible, we can read it. Let's look at how they did. So part A, as we said before, they didn't get the marks there. So that was one that surprised me, it didn't do so well. Part B, all except the final A mark is available for use when in correct part A. So they can get marks in part B, even if they got part A wrong. Okay. They managed to get one method mark, but they didn't get any other marks, I'm afraid. So they only get 1 out of 8. But they can still pick up marks in part B if they have got part A incorrect. Core Pure 1 question 6. Again, we've got the trait data there. Again, if we look at where those marks are being lost, it seems to be the last, it seems to be the A1, the A2, the A3, the accuracy marks seems to be the main problem. With those C graders especially. Okay. The D graders are getting, you know, 0.67, 2/3 of them are getting that independent mark. 0.6 are getting the method mark. It's the accuracy marks that are being the issue. So proof by induction is going to come up. Okay, it shouldn't be surprising. And you know, there are lots of people that do well on it. However, there are people that struggle sometimes with the structure. And here it seems to be the basis step, you know, where people are losing marks. Really hit home the structure of these questions and how they need to approach them. Basis step, inductive step. It's something, you know, they've got to go through the basis, say what the assumption is, do the inductive part, and obviously still make sure that they write that final statement as the end thing. And sometimes they will do that, but they won't get that mark if they've got other accuracy marks that they've lost. They can't just write that and expect to get that mark for that. They have to have some other accuracy marks to be able to gain that final mark, but make sure they do write that final statement. Should hopefully be able to look at a response here. A nice, neat response. At first glance, you can see, oh, it looks lovely and neat. They've got some things there. They've written that final statement. However, let's look see what they got. So they got the independent mark start for check in n equals 1. They've got 2 method marks, but they did not achieve a correct super expression with k plus 1. Okay. If they'd got that, they'd be able to get the other accuracy marks, but because they didn't get that, they can't. Okay, so they cannot get the other accuracy marks because they didn't get that one. They've dropped 3 marks there. 3 out of 6. Let's now look at Core question 8. So again, we've got differential equation here. Again, we've got a limitation one there as well. Looking at the mark traits. Again, really carefully see where we can see those marks are being lost. Part D, lots of marks being lost. Part D, Part E. Look at Part E. Even the A star, you know, 0.19, very low for Part E. Okay. and very low for M3 and A2 on part D. So examiner comment, the last 2 marks, did prove discriminating. Only minority candidates proceeding to the final correct answer. Okay. Part E was only scored by a very minority of candidates. It was the worst answered question part in the entire paper. Okay, so things like that, limitations for this particular question, both populations becoming negative sometimes, which is not possible, things like that, or the minimal accepted answer was gives negative values. That was accepted. So getting to think about the context, think about limitations, they're losing, silly marks on those. If we can try to make sure they understand and can contextualize the problems, use these modeling questions really well in your lessons to make sure they understand the limitations, that would be really important to do. Let's now look at question 2 from Corpus 2. Again, we've got the trait data there. So hyperbolic function, differentiation to do, and Maclaurin series to do. Looking at the trait data first, again, we can see where the marks are low. So again, look at the C graders, only half of them are getting that first method mark. It drops dramatically after that. Part B was better. So it's part A, they seem to be getting wrong. So part B and part C, not so bad. Part A was quite bad. So, get them to think about, are they able to differentiate? If they get that, then hopefully they can do part B as well. Maclaurin series, we know, was an issue. So again, some candidates fail to realize the requirement for the application of the quotient product rule and chain rules. Again, failing to multiply by 2 for part B. Again, using the formula books. Forgetting, the formula for Maclaurin expansion is in the formula book, and therefore, misquoting it, thinking, if you're going to go through, remember it, write it down wrong, it's in the formula book. They can copy it out, they can quote that, they can fill it in. There's marks they can get. Okay, so make sure they know what's available and they use formula books to ensure they're writing the correct formulas down. We have a response for that one. So here we've got for part A, they use the alternative free method for this one. So there was lots of alternative methods for this one. They got part A, M1, A1, they missed the other 2 marks. Part B, they got that one incorrect. Part C, they did pick up 2 method marks in part C. Okay, they attempted to use 2 of their values and they correctly applied the Maclaurin series, so they didn't get accuracy mark. So even though they dropped marks in part A and part B, they still able to pick up 2 marks in part C. So Corpus 2, question 9 here. This is the parametric volume question we talked about. See, again, there's limitation question there. Challenging for most candidates, many failing to make any progress at all in part B. Let's look at the trait data. So look at the C, look at the B second accuracy mark. None of the C graders or less are getting that mark. And even the A star candidates only 0.27 getting that mark there. Part A was relatively good. It was part B where all those marks are being lost. So you can analyze yourself, what method marks are they losing? what they need to do to get that mark. Think about, each time you've got a question, look at some trait data. What are they not getting right? Make sure you focus on those. They were still able to gain that independent mark in part B, even if they made errors in the previous stuff. So we can see the independent mark in part B, they still are able to get that mark, even if they made errors before that. You have a response to that one? So part A went well. Got both of those votes correct. Part B, they did get some marks. They got the first method marks. They got an accuracy mark. They didn't get the second accuracy mark. They got the independent mark. They got the next method mark. They didn't get the final accuracy mark. They gave the correct reason for part C. This person got 8 out of 10. This was a good response. Here's question 7 from Corporal 2. Again, we've got the trait data up here. Most candidates for part D were successful and scored 4 marks or did not know where to start. So they either knew it or they didn't. They could either do it all and do well, or they got nothing at all. Okay. So looking at the trait data, if we look at part D, we can see those C graders. Okay for the independent mark, not great on everyone's. Okay, let's now look at the AS paper, which is question 6. This is the vectors question we were discussing earlier. There's a modeling question. We've got some pipes, we've got some points, and we've also got an equation of a line. So we've got pipe 1 positive for these 2 points, pipe 2 as this equation. We've got to determine the vector equation of pipe 1, determine the coordinates of the point where pipe 1 meets the surface. According to the model, we've got to find the acute angle, and then part D, we've got the shortest distance to find between the 2 pipes. So part A, vast majority, correctly formed the vector equation. That was okay. Again, any loss was due to not having an R on the equation. Part B was generally okay as well. C, again, wasn't too bad. Part D is where most candidates found this difficult, okay, and struggled with this one. Here's the trait data for that. Again, we can see, if we look at part D, very low for part D. The other parts are generally okay. Part D is not so good. That's where they're dropping those marks. We do have a response to that one to look at. Part A, they've got the method mark, but they have missed out the R equals. Okay, they've written P1 equals. So they've lost accuracy mark for that. Method mark for part B, but again, they've got an incorrect coordinate at the end. So know what to do, but making some mistakes. Part C, again, picking up both method marks, but again, their accuracy. Part D, got a method mark for finding the equation of the line between the 2 lines, but then no more marks. So in AS, they would find the shortest distance by using doing a dot product twice. Again, we cover this again in the full further in terms of in FP1 by looking at cross product and the formula for skew difference. If you have students that drop down from full A-level further maths to AS, they can still use the cross products and the formula. If they've learned it, it's still accepted. They can still get marks because the alternative mark scheme provides that. If you have time, if you've got an AS core pure group and you have time, still make sure you teach these methods, the AS methods. But if you have time, you could look to see, are there any other full A-level methods and from other spec that you might want to additionally add on to potentially help them with some questions with vectors. There are some things that they could learn if you've got time, such as the cross product from FP1. If you feel that you've got time for that, they could use those methods for some vectors questions later on. It could make some things easier, but still ensure you do teach them the AS methods, because there might be at times where they've got to show a particular working out or have to show a particular method. So, as an addition, not a replacement. That's important. This person got 5 out of 12. Another AS question here was question 2. This was the reflection rotation question. Again, they're provided with the general right-hand rule formulas here. It was part A seems to be the main issue. Losing that mark. Look at the C grade students. Yeah, they didn't perform particularly well on any of those parts. And one more AS question, question 5. We can see that, again, part D and part C were the main issues. Okay. So in part C, although the vast majority of candidates add the radius distance to the origin center, some candidates found the coordinates of the required point on the circle, which, although involved more work, but it's a method. In part D, many of the cohort identify the need to find the area of the minor segment. Within this, a correct angle was found at the centered circle from which segment error is found. Any errors here were mainly finding the required angle, which often result in the loss of the 2 axial marks. So they're understanding what to do, but it's accuracy that's the issue. Okay, so where are students generally losing marks? So lots of times it's routine sign and fraction errors, okay, and then incorrect use of brackets as well. So basics, notation, arithmetic errors are important. They're going to be, losing marks there. Completing proofs, so making sure they state at the end the left-hand side equals the right-hand side, okay? Where we see that in the mark scheme, so that asterisk, it means they want to see what was printed in the paper. So if they've got to show something, we've got to make sure they actually write that down. Again, in series and proof and doctrinations, they choose to expand out some horrible expression rather than look for things that they can factor out. So, it ends up in a messy expansion, which they then can't factorize later on. But if they can factor something out, it will make things simpler. I've mentioned before about not writing a closure statement in proof by induction. Again, in proof by induction questions, factorizing to get matching indices. So those divisibility questions, trying to get that same index that you need, the same exponent you need, they're struggling with that sometimes. Again, limitations and validity of models. Okay, we've talked about that quite a lot. Failure to use a method that is, dictated in the question is important as well. And making sure they put things in the required form. So like we said earlier about the coordinates, making sure they're writing coordinate form or write x equals y equals z equals. And again, there's times where they've got to make sure they round things correctly to what's stated, making sure they've got exact values if it asks for an exact value. Reading questions carefully is important, and making sure they read just the front of the paper and follow any instructions about how they should get their answers on the front of the paper as well. Here's the grade boundaries. Now, a reminder that the 2022 and the 2023 still reflect the adjustment for the pandemic. Okay. But you can see the grade boundaries for Corpus 1 here. Someone's just mentioned about proof of induction to do with differentiation. Proof by induction is the generalized thing. If they can, the methods are still going to be the same process, the basis, the assumption, and the inductive step. So the process is the same. If they have a proof of question that involves something that you're not too sure about, if you see a question, let the team know, contact the team, ask them the questions, and they'll be able to clarify things. I don't know exactly what question you're talking about here, so because I can't see the question, I can't make a proper comment on it. But things also like the enhanced guidance might have some extra information. So the enhanced guidance, for example, mentions that they've also got to do occurrence relation proof induction. Okay, so making sure you covering all the sort of things they might do proof inductions for, based on the enhanced guidance, is important. So Corpus 2 here. Again, here's the grade boundaries. And for the AS paper as well. It's mentioned in the chat, the 2023 still had that protection still, so there was still a little bit. It returned to pre-pandemic standards, but there was still some level of protection on the grades. So what can we do to support you? So again, there's lots of material available to support you and your students. So in the Emporium, and again, there's a link provided, we've got our teaching aid materials. We've also got topic tests by paper. Okay, and for those topic tests, we can see we've got a whole stream there of different topics covered, and these are created based on using legacy past papers where appropriate. Okay, and we map them to the new content. There's also some new questions that are based on shadow questions, and also some brand new exam style questions. So there's if a legacy paper didn't particularly have a new topic in it, then we've written brand new questions to cover those things. So lots of brand new topic tests available to use. Shadow papers. So the shadow papers for the Core Pure will be released soon. Okay, they're still being finalised. So that it won't be long before they're out, but again, the shadow papers will be available. There's lots and lots of practice papers available as well. And also we have the enhanced QLAs now available to download. And the skills map will also be released very, very, very soon. In terms of the exam reports exemplars, they're available. And now we have a new look to our exemplar. So this is following feedback from teachers. We've changed the format of exemplars. They're now going to be in PowerPoint format. So they can be used as like, CPD in front of teachers. You could present them to teachers or for class discussions. It will still include the question, performance figures, responses, and the examiner comments for each one, detailing where marks were gained and not awarded. So same content is there, just a new style presentation. Don't forget, you can contact your subject advisor if you've got any other questions.